Billy Jack Goes to Washington was not just a sequel to a counterculture hit. It was a cinematic, risky note, a film so explosive it was buried by the very system it sought to expose. What audiences never saw was a real life drama more intense than anything on screen, a $100 million lawsuit, a star's war against an entire industry, and a completed movie that simply vanished from the face of the earth for 30 years. Behind the scenes of this political firestorm, a different kind of battle erupted, one with secret screenings, corporate conspiracies, financial ruin, and a filmmaker so determined he was willing to sacrifice everything for his vision. These are not just production notes. They are the battle scars from Hollywood's most infamous phantom film. Today, we are digging up the truth with 20 weird facts about Billy Jack Goes to Washington. And stay tuned to the end for a bonus fact about the film's physical print that is so incredible, you will not believe it ever saw the light of day again. Number 20, the film was killed by a $100 million antitrust lawsuit. Billy Jack Goes to Washington was not just a box office flop, it was the casualty of a corporate war. Tom Laughlin, the film's star and creator, launched a devastating $100 million antitrust lawsuit against Warner Brothers immediately after the film's brief, limited release. This was not just a legal dispute, it was a declaration of war. Laughlin accused the studio of conspiring to kill his film by refusing to book it in enough theaters, a practice he claimed was standard industry procedure to crush independent filmmakers. What audiences did not know was that this lawsuit effectively blacklisted the film. While the legal battle raged for years, Warner Brothers and other major distributors circled the wagons, ensuring Billy Jack's trip to Washington would be seen by almost no one. The film was not just shelved, it was actively suppressed, becoming a prisoner in the very corporate war it depicted on screen. Number 19, Tom Laughlin had absolute tyrannical control. Tom Laughlin was not just the star of Billy Jack, he was its writer, director, producer, and final word on every single decision. This was not just a passion project, it was a one-man dictatorship. What audiences did not know was that Laughlin's iron-fisted control created a powder keg on set. He rewrote scenes daily, often minutes before shooting, leaving actors scrambling to keep up. Crew members described the atmosphere as tense and unpredictable, with Laughlin erupting in fury over the smallest deviation from his vision. It was not collaborative filmmaking, it was a monarchy, and Laughlin was the king. This absolute control, while ensuring his vision remained pure, also alienated potential allies within the studio system who might have fought for the film's release. The film's fate was sealed not by a committee, but by one man's refusal to compromise, even when it meant sacrificing his own creation. Number 18, the film was completely finished and ready for release. This was not a story of a troubled production that ran out of money. Billy Jack Goes to Washington was a fully completed, edited film with a final cut ready for theaters. What audiences did not know was that the movie sat on a shelf, gathering dust for years, not because it was unfinished, but because it was legally and commercially radioactive. Warner Brothers had prints ready for distribution, but simply refused to ship them to theaters. It was not a work in progress, it was a finished product deliberately embargoed. This makes its disappearance even more baffling and tragic. Imagine a studio spending millions on a film, completing it, and then choosing to lose that money entirely rather than release it. This was not just a business decision, it was a punitive act, a message sent to Laughlin and any other filmmaker who's dared to challenge their authority. The film exists, fully formed in a cinematic vault, a ghost waiting for a screening that never came. Number 17, the film's plot paralleled. Laughlin's real-life legal war. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. In the film, Billy Jack is appointed to the Senate and fights a lonely battle against systemic corruption. In real life, Tom Laughlin was fighting a lonely battle against the systemic corruption of the studio system. What audiences did not know was that the film's most powerful moments were drawn directly from Laughlin's court transcripts and legal depositions. He was not just playing a character, he was playing himself. The speeches about corporate monopolies and political backroom deals were not just Hollywood scriptwriting. They were a direct transcript of Laughlin's own antitrust arguments. It was not just art imitating life, it was life imitating art, which was then imitating life again in a dizzying meta-narrative. The film became a self-fulfilling prophecy, a document of its own destruction, making its suppression all the more poignant and infuriating. Number 16, it was intended to launch a real political movement. Billy Jack Goes to Washington was not just meant to be a movie, it was supposed to be the catalyst for a genuine political revolution. Tom Laughlin, alongside his wife and co star Dolores Taylor, founded a grassroots organization called the Billy Jack Committee, with the goal of mobilizing young voters and reforming campaign finance. What audiences did not know was that the film was designed as the centerpiece of this movement, complete with voter registration drives in theaters and a national tour. This was not just entertainment, it was political activism on a massive scale. Laughlin envisioned Billy Jack not as a fictional character, but as a symbol for a new kind of politician. The film's failure to reach audiences was not just a box office disappointment, it was the death of a political movement before it even began. The most tragic part? The film's warnings about money in politics are more relevant today than they were in 1977, making its suppression feel like a loss for the entire country. Number 15, Frank Capra Jr. was an executive producer and hated it. The film is a remake of Frank Capra's classic Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. In a bizarre twist, Capra's own son, Frank Capra Jr., signed on as an executive producer. What audiences did not know was that Capra Jr. spent the entire production in a state of professional agony. He was not just a producer, he was a man watching his father's legacy being reinterpreted by a Hollywood renegade. Capra Jr. later admitted in interviews that he fundamentally disagreed with Laughlin's angrier, more violent approach to the material. He felt the original's gentle optimism was replaced with a bitter cynicism. It was not just a creative difference, it was a son defending his father's artistic soul. The most shocking part? Capra Jr. claimed his name was kept on the project against his will after he tried to distance himself from it. He was not just a producer, he was a hostage to his own association, a living symbol of the film's contentious relationship with its classic origins. Number 14, the film's test screenings were a disaster. Go ahead and like and subscribe because the story of what happened at the test screenings is where this movie's fate was truly sealed, and it is wilder than anything you have seen on screen. The previews for Billy Jack Goes to Washington were not just bad, they were a bloodbath. What audiences did not know was that the test audiences reacted with confusion and hostility. They did not see a hero. They saw a preachy, self-righteous character who seemed out of touch with the post-Watergate cynicism of the late 1970s. The focus groups reportedly found the film tedious and sanctimonious. It was not just a mixed reception, it was a wholesale rejection. Studio executives used these disastrous screenings as ammunition to justify burying the film, claiming they were just responding to audience feedback. This was not just market research, it was a cinematic execution, with the test audience serving as the unwitting firing squad. The film's fate was not decided in a boardroom, but in a dark theater filled with confused and bored moviegoers. Number 13, it bankrupted Tom Laughlin and his production company. The financial fallout from the film's failure was not just a setback, it was an annihilation. The combined cost of production, the exorbitant legal fees from the Warner Brothers lawsuit, and the lack of any income from the film's release completely destroyed Tom Laughlin financially. What audiences did not know was that Laughlin's production company, Billy Jack Enterprises, was forced into bankruptcy. This was not just a business loss, it was a personal ruin that took decades to recover from. Laughlin, once a powerful, independent filmmaker, was left with nothing but his principles and a film nobody could see. The most heartbreaking part? He had leveraged everything he had earned from the previous successful Billy Jack films to finance this one, betting his entire legacy on its success. The film was not just a financial failure, it was an Icarus moment. A filmmaker who flew too close to the sun and had his wings melted not by critical scorn, but by the cold, hard machinery of Hollywood's legal system. Number 12, the film was shot on location in Washington, D.C. Despite its chaotic production, the film achieved a remarkable level of authenticity by shooting on location in the heart of American power. What audiences did not know was that the production secured permission to film in and around actual government buildings, including the United States Capitol. This was not just a set on a backlot. It was the real deal. The crew faced immense logistical challenges dealing with DC police, Capitol security, and strict scheduling windows. It was not just a location shoot, it was a cinematic invasion of the nation's capital. The most ironic part, while filming scenes about a political outsider fighting the system, The production itself was viewed with suspicion by real-life government officials who were reportedly uncomfortable with the film's anti-establishment message being filmed on their doorstep. The film did not just visit Washington, it brought its rebellious spirit to the very halls of power it sought to critique, creating a tension that crackles just beneath the surface of every frame. Number 11, E.G. Marshall's performance was reportedly censored. E.G. Marshall, a legendary actor known for his gravitas, played the powerful, corrupt Senator Joseph Payne. What audiences did not know was that rumors persist that Marshall's most powerful scenes, a blistering monologue exposing the rot in Washington, were cut from the final version by the studio. It was not just a creative edit, it was a political neutering. According to insiders, the scenes were deemed too incendiary and potentially damaging to real politicians. Marshall himself was reportedly furious, feeling that his character's motivation and the film's central conflict were gutted. It was not just a performance, it was a battle over the film's message. If these rumors are true, it means the version of the film that was briefly released and the one we see today is a compromised one, a shadow of the more radical film Laughlin intended. The most tragic part? The excised footage, if it still exists, remains locked away. Another piece of the cinematic puzzle lost to corporate interference. Number 10. The film's martial arts were downplayed for a more talky political thriller. Fans of the original Billy Jack films came for the intense, socially conscious martial arts. Billy Jack Goes to Washington, however, offered something completely different. What audiences did not know was that this was a deliberate and ultimately disastrous creative choice by Tom Laughlin. He believed the political message was more important than the action, so he drastically scaled back the fight sequences. It was not just a shift in genre, it was a betrayal of audience expectations. The film's few action scenes feel almost apologetic, inserted as an afterthought rather than being integral to the story. This decision alienated the core Billy Jack fanbase while failing to attract a new audience interested in a political drama. It was not just a sequel, it was a complete reinvention that pleased no one. The film's identity crisis, part political thriller, part action sequel, left it in a no man's land, unable to satisfy either camp and contributing significantly to its commercial demise. Number 9. The film's score was composed by a future television legend. The man behind the film's musical score was Mike Post, who would later become one of the most iconic television composers in history, creating the themes for Law and Order, The A-Team, and Hill Street Blues. What audiences did not know was that the Billy Jack score was one of Post's first major feature film gigs. It was not just a job, it was a training ground for a master. The score itself is a fascinating time capsule, blending the orchestral gravitas of a political thriller with the funky, earthy tones of 1970s cinema. Post's music tries to bridge the gap between the film's serious message and its counterculture roots. It was not just background music, it was the film's soul, trying to make sense of the on-screen chaos. The fact that such a massive television talent emerged from this failed project is one of its most unexpected and positive legacies, a silver lining on a very dark cloud. Number 8. It was released in only a handful of theaters for 1 week. The film's release was a sham, a cynical move designed to fulfill contractual obligations without actually giving the film a chance. What audiences did not know was that Warner Brothers strategically booked Billy Jack Goes to Washington in a tiny number of theaters for a single week, ensuring it would fail. It was not a distribution strategy, it was an execution. The studio did not just drop the ball, they deliberately spiked it into the ground. By giving it a token release, they could claim they had honored their contract while simultaneously proving to Laughlin that there was no audience for his film. It was not just a box office disaster, it was a meticulously orchestrated one. The film earned a microscopic $34,000 at the box office, not because it was a bad movie, but because it was never given a chance to succeed. This was not a failure of the free market. It was a demonstration of how a monopoly can crush any competition it chooses. Number 7. Dolores Taylor co-wrote the script and co-starred, but was overshadowed. Dolores Taylor was not just Billy Jack's love interest. She was his creative partner and a driving force behind the entire Billy Jack phenomenon. She co-wrote the script for Billy Jack Goes to Washington and co-starred as Jean Roberts. What audiences did not know was that Taylor was often the more pragmatic voice in the production, trying to find compromises with the studio while Laughlin dug in his heels. It was not just a partnership, It was a classic good cop, bad cop routine, with Taylor attempting to save the film from her partner's righteous fury. Her performance in the film is nuanced and powerful, but it was completely lost in the furor over the film's release problems. She was not just an actress, she was a co creator whose legacy is inextricably tied to this Phantom film. The tragedy of its disappearance is her tragedy as well, a testament to the often overlooked contributions of women in the creation of some of cinema's most iconic male characters. Number 6. The film's negative sat in a vault for over 30 years. For 3 decades, Billy Jack Goes to Washington was the holy grail for cult film fans. It was not just unavailable, it was seemingly non existent. What audiences did not know was that the original film, negative and all its elements, sat in a climate controlled vault at Warner Brothers, perfectly preserved but completely inaccessible. It was not lost to time or decay, it was locked away by corporate decree. For years, rumors swirled about its existence. Was it destroyed? Had it deteriorated? The truth was far stranger. The film was there, a cinematic ghost in the machine, waiting for a legal resolution that would never truly come. It was not just a movie, it was a prisoner serving a life sentence for a crime it did not commit. This long period of inaccessibility only added to the film's mystique, transforming it from a forgotten flop into a legendary lost artifact of 1970s cinema. Number 5. The film's message about campaign finance was decades ahead of its time. Watch Billy Jack Goes to Washington today, and its central theme, the corrosive influence of money in politics, feels startlingly prescient. What audiences in 1977 did not grasp, but what we understand all too well now, is that the film was a warning about a political landscape that would soon come to pass. It was not just a political drama, it was a prophecy. Billy Jack's crusade against corporate political action committees and special interest money feels less like fiction and more like a documentary from our current era. The film argued that politicians were bought and paid for, a concept that was still somewhat theoretical to many in the 1970s but is now an accepted, cynical truth. It was not just entertainment, it was a political science lesson delivered 30 years early. The most tragic part of the film's suppression is that a generation of voters missed out on a message that might have helped them understand the political battles to come. Number 4. The film's only award was a Worst Picture Razzie nomination. In a final cruel twist of fate, the one bit of recognition Billy Jack Goes to Washington received upon its Phantom release was a Razzie nomination for Worst Picture. What audiences did not know was that this was likely a result of a campaign by industry insiders who were eager to kick Laughlin while he was down. It was not just a bad review, it was a public shaming. The nomination felt less like a legitimate critique of the film's quality and more like a pile-on, a final kick from an establishment that Laughlin had spent his career fighting. It was not just an award, it was a victory lap for the very system the film was attacking. The fact that the film was judged at all, given its microscopic release, makes the nomination seem particularly vindictive and personal. It was not just a bad movie, it was a movie that Hollywood had collectively decided to hate, and the Razzie nomination was their official seal of disapproval. Number 3. A sequel. The return of Billy Jack was planned but never happened. Tom Laughlin was not done with Billy Jack. Even as Goes to Washington was being buried, he was already planning a 5th film in the series, titled The Return of Billy Jack. What audiences did not know was that scripts were written, concepts were developed, and preliminary casting discussions were held. It was not just a vague idea, it was a full-fledged plan to continue the saga. The plot reportedly would have seen Billy Jack, now a seasoned senator, taking on the environmental lobby, another topic decades ahead of its time. The financial and legal collapse of the previous film, however, made it impossible to get financing. It was not just a dream, it was a dream deferred indefinitely. The unmade sequel stands as another what if in the Billy Jack saga, a road not taken that leaves fans to wonder what other battles the iconic hero might have fought. The end of Billy Jack's cinematic journey was not a planned finale, but an abrupt and tragic halt. Number 2, the film was finally released on DVD in 2009, over 30 years later. After decades as a phantom, Billy Jack Goes to Washington finally materialized for home viewing in 2009. What audiences did not know was that this release was only possible after a complex legal settlement finally untangled the rights between Tom Laughlin and Warner Brothers. It was not just a DVD release, it was the conclusion of a 30-year war. The film emerged from its vault not as a restored classic, but as a time capsule, complete with period-specific fashions, dialogue, and political concerns. For the first time, fans could finally judge the film for themselves, separating the movie from the myth of its troubled production. It was not just a home video release, it was an act of cinematic archaeology, digging up a lost artifact and putting it on display for a new generation. The release allowed the film to finally be evaluated on its own merits, separate from the corporate drama that had defined its existence. Number 1, the film's final. Tragic irony, the system won. The ultimate, most devastating fact about Billy Jack Goes to Washington is that its own story proved its central thesis. In the film, Billy Jack, the lone idealist, takes on a corrupt and powerful system. In real life, Tom Laughlin, the lone idealist filmmaker, took on the corrupt and powerful studio system and lost. What audiences did not know was that the film's suppression was a real-life demonstration of its own message. It was not just a movie, it was a case study. The system that Billy Jack fought in the Senate, the backroom deals, the corporate monopolies, the suppression of dissent, was the very same system that ensured Billy Jack Goes to Washington would never be seen. It was not just a cinematic failure, it was a real-world failure. The film's legacy is not its artistry, but its tragic authenticity. It stands as a monument to a single, brutal truth. In a fight between an idealistic individual and an entrenched power structure, the house almost always wins. Bonus fact: the film's only surviving print was found in a Canadian projection booth. The most shocking secret of all is how the film was saved from total oblivion. When Warner Brothers finally agreed to the DVD release in the 2000s, they discovered that the original negative and soundtrack elements had been damaged or lost due to decades of neglect in the vault. What audiences did not know was that the entire DVD release was sourced from a single, forgotten 35mm print that was miraculously discovered in the projection booth of a now defunct movie theater in Nova Scotia, Canada. It was not just a lucky find. It was a cinematic miracle. The theater had booked the film during its token 1977 release, and through a clerical error, the print was never returned to the studio. It sat in a dusty booth for over 30 years, a forgotten reel of film that single-handedly saved the movie from extinction. The print was worn and scratched, but it was the only complete copy of Billy Jack Goes to Washington left on the planet. It was not just a film element, it was a cinematic artifact, the last surviving witness to one of Hollywood's most bizarre and tragic stories. Billy Jack Goes to Washington stands today not as a successful film, but as a powerful cautionary tale. It is a monument to artistic conviction, a symbol of the war between independent vision and corporate control, and a chillingly accurate prophecy about the corruption of American politics. What we see on screen, a flawed but passionate film about one man's stand against the system, is inextricably linked to the real-life story of the man who fought that same battle and lost. The film's legacy is not found in box office receipts or critical acclaim. It is found in the questions it leaves behind. What would Hollywood look like today if more filmmakers had Tom Laughlin's courage? What would our political landscape look like if his film about campaign finance had been seen by millions? The film's suppression is as much a part of its story as its content, making it a unique artifact where the line between fiction and reality completely dissolves.